All right, so we're going to do Shemini today. And in doing this, by the way, shalom. This is the day when, well, actually, this is really, I would call it the climax, because everything so far has been building to this point, and everything that happens after is kind of a down. This is the key point. This is what the whole book of the Torah is really written to, is to this starting point at this place. And so we're going to do some trivia, if you don't mind, because I have several questions that I keep asking myself, and so I'm going to pose them to you. Now, this is the day when Aaron and his sons are actually going to become Cohen. Up until now, Moses has been the priest. He's gone through the 7 days. He's taught them how. And this is going to be, and we're really only going to go very, very slowly, because I want you to look at Exodus, or at Leviticus chapter 9, and we're going to look at the first 4 words for about 20 minutes, and then we'll get further. But the first 4 words are very interesting, because it says on the 8th day. The 8th day. The 8th day of what? The 8th day of what? See, that's the interesting thing. You know, if we would connect what's written above it to this, we would say this is the 8th day following the 7 days of preparation. But that's not what the rabbis or the sages really wanted to get across. And so I have several thoughts. Ross and I yesterday were picking through, and he was thinking out loud. And finally, we found somebody other than us who might agree with us. And so the character that we found was Rabbi Akiva. And so, Ross, I want you to tell your story first before I continue with mine, okay?
Okay, well, it's just, yeah, that's basically what it was. We were thinking out loud, and I thought I had noticed a situation where there were 2 separate 8 days. And we brought that up in the discussion. And that's when we found out that there's quite a bit of discussion amongst the sages about this. And I cannot fully recall what he said about Rabbi Akiva in his commentary.
He believed in that there were 2 sets of 8 days.
2 sets, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I picked very carefully through what we're reading, and it involves Leviticus chapter 8, and then here we are in Leviticus 9, and I was able to find out exactly how he came up with the 2 separate 8 days. Shall I stop there and let you continue, or?
No, go ahead, finish it, because I'm going to talk a different way altogether.
Very well. To make the point, if you look in Leviticus chapter 8, verse 14 to be specific, you'll see that Moses brought the bull. And then it says it was slaughtered. Well, obviously, I mean, you have to think about it, but Moses did it. Moses put the blood on the altar, consecrated it. Verse 16, separated the fat, the liver, the kidneys, and it went up in smoke. He took the hide, the flesh, the dung outside the camp. And again, this is all chapter 8. He brought a ram, slaughtered it. It went up in smoke. Then you come, that's enough examples. If you come forward to chapter 9, you'll see that in verse 7, Aaron comes forward. Verse 8, Aaron does the calf. Verse 9, his sons bring the blood. Verse 10 and 11, I believe, is where his sons take the hide, flesh, and dung outside the camp. Verse 13, if my lines are correct. But then you get down to 9:14. They washed the parts and then send it up in smoke. So you can clearly see one was Moses doing it, and here in chapter 9, Aaron's doing it. And this is 8 days after Moses had done what he did. There's other information to back this up. in that they were ordained, anointed, and told not to leave the entrance of the tent of meeting for 7 full days.
So what he's basically getting to the point of is the fact that in chapter 8, we're looking at a 7-day period. And now here in chapter 9, we're looking at a 7-day period. So there may be, chronology doesn't work real well in the Torah because it was never meant to be a chronological book. And so there are several events that may be overlaying one another. And so that's where a lot of the discussion comes from. And I'm going to cover some of that idea because it's rather interesting where this goes. But if I want to just simply take and focus on the 8th day, Mary, you got a question? Go ahead.
Did anyone else lose audio while he was speaking, or was that just me?
That must have been just me, you.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
That's okay. So what he's really trying to say, and what we're really trying to say, is the word the 8th day is a key to understanding that there is more than, this is not just about the natural world. This is about the supernatural. This is above rational. This is super rational. Now, I get to this point by doing the following. When Adam was in the garden, remember Adam created a sin, or we say he ate of the forbidden fruit. And so therefore, God's voice no longer was in the garden with him, but was above the garden. And it says that in the Talmud that he was in the second heaven at that point in time. In other words, he was departing from them. Each and every major sin that's written into the scriptures from then on through the Tower of Babel, each and every event took God further and further away from man and further away from his kingdom. It wasn't until Abraham came that the idea of the one God came back. And so Abraham began the process. Isaac came next, Jacob, Joseph. From Joseph, we went to Amram. From Amram, we go to Moses. Each and every one of these characters brings God back closer. When we get to the character Aaron along with Moshe, we now begin to see an 8th day, or a bringing together of the Shekinah, which is God's presence, in a feminine form as he now enters into the tabernacle. This is the culmination. This is bringing God back after man had caused God to move farther and farther away from him. That's what we're trying to get at. Now, in certain years, this particular parsha is read 8 times. When it surrounds the celebration of Pesach, they'll say this in 8 different occasions. They will go through reading this set of scriptures. So the scriptures are different. It's the only scripture in all of the Torah in which a number is actually the title. No other one. This is it. This is where it's happening at. Now, in Kabbalah, each number expresses not only a quality, but a quantity. So we easily can see a quantity of 8. But what we're going to have to look at is the quality of what's going on. That's really going to be kind of the direction I want to take us. Now, I need to, again, remind you, and I've talked this before, but I guess for anyone who listens to it who's new, I just want you to understand, early manuscripts of the Bible did not have chapter and verse. Chapter and verse is a Christian idea. Chapter and verse was put in about the 13th century by Stephen Langston, who was the Archbishop of England. And he decided that he needed it in order, when he got into a debate with a Jew over their understandings of Torah, that he could point to a specific place and he could match and bring together multiple scriptures from different places. So he went through and he created what we call the chapters and verses of the 5 books. And so in this particular case, it works out where chapter 9 begins this particular chapter. But there'll be chapters like in chapter 12, where we now go into the new chapter or the new section, that he will start in the 12th verse will be actually the new parsha. So man's ideas were not necessarily God's. To go back even further, originally, back in the oldest sections we can understand, the Torah was divided into 156 parts. And the reason it was divided into 156 was so that over a 3-year period, they could read through the entire Torah and study it. But they did it over 3 years. And when it came to Babylon, it was the rabbis in Babylon who decided that the book should be read in 1 year. And so they created 53, 54 parshas that they divided it into. And those parshas were established by their understanding of the Torah text. So when they're looking at the Torah, they're looking at it differently than what we've ever looked at it. We see things as being very disjointed. They're looking at things and saying, all of these in this section have a quality that ties them together. Now, it's hard to imagine that the lighting of the altar and kosher foods would be in the same chapter or in the same parsha. But hopefully I can tie that together for you to give you an understanding of what quality they were looking at that put them back together again. That's my hope as we're going through this. So obviously there's a division. Obviously the parsha before should lead us into this parsha and probably have a very close connection. And so that's why originally they said there was only one 8-day period, and that the 7 days that are listed here before us, those are the 7 days of preparation that was given when Moses was putting together and taking down the tent, establishing all the offerings, giving everybody the opportunity to understand what they were going to do. Now, he was only teaching 5 people, himself and, well, actually Aaron, his 4 sons, and himself, because they're the only Cohens at this point in time. Everybody else was a Levite. All of them were. And so there's a very small group that are involved in this whole process. So he's going through the teaching of this to them. And so what we see then is the culmination of that consecration. But I also want you to look at it from a different point of view. I want you to take the number 8 and I want you to turn it sideways in your brain. What happens when you take the number 8 and turn it sideways? You get an entirely new symbol. The symbol's called infinity. It's something that you and I got introduced to when we were in math class. Now it's about physics. It's about all kinds of sciences. It's about philosophy. It's everywhere. But in the beginning, infinity was simply about mathematics. And so as we're looking at this whole thing, infinity is characterized by a number of uncountable objects. So what we're looking at is something that's really uncountable if we're going to get into the metaphors here. We're looking at something that is totally different than what you probably had ever thought about. So the concept is basically described as something that is huge and it's boundless. It has been studied by lots of scientists, by lots of philosophers all over the world. But it was the Greeks and the Indians, not the American Indians, but the Indians from India, who actually began to take this symbol and began to apply it to everything that they had. So the symbol for it is this sideways 8. Now, John Wallace, an Englishman, he's going to be the first one who actually takes this creation and puts it into science for us. He's going to establish the mathematical use and the scientific use of this whole thing, because he was a mathematician. That's where he works. So it represents a line that supposedly never ends. So that's why it loops upon itself back to where it started from. So Wallace also introduced at the same point in time 1/infinity, the fraction. He began to say not only is there 1, but there are fractional, and we can get down to the point of being so small that it's impossible to see. Well, it's not till later on when we begin to understand about electrons and protons and neutrons and go smaller than that. We couldn't understand probably all that he was thinking at that particular point in time. So when the number of infinity is just a symbol that's talking about a horizontal version of an 8. Now, go back to the Parsha. It was the 8th day. Most of us, again, we go back and say this was the first day of Nisan, because that is the captured understanding. That is what most teach. It's not what everybody teach, but it's what most of us teach. In the fact that the 7 days were the 7 days of Adar. It was Adar 23 all the way to the 30th. That was the end of the 7 days of preparation. Now, this 8th day becomes the first day of Nisan. That's what they understand it to be. But they use the word not 8th. Well, they use the word 8th. They use the word Shemini. They don't finish it. They don't say the 8th day of the preparation. They don't say the first day of the week. They don't say anything. They call it the 8th, and they leave it go at that. So there's more to that word than what we've ever understood, because that word just seems to hang there. There's nothing on either side of it. It's just the 8th. And so as we're looking at this, then we have to understand that we're looking at something that is very different. Now, I want to go back again and let's do the Jewish math thing. We know the number 6. 6 always speaks of the 6 days of the work week. 6 also speaks of the 6 cardinal directions: north, south, east, and west, and up and down. The 7th day we always recognize as being Sabbath. But Sabbath also fills all the directions. That's how the Jewish Kabbalah understands it. Everything is surrounded in this. Now, the 8th, on the other hand, is a quality that is above and beyond. It literally is an encircling light. That is how it is understood. It's not something that you and I, it's a divine source. That's probably the easiest way to say it. So this is the day on which the tabernacle was erected, and 10 specific miracles will occur on this particular day. And I'm not going to go spend time talking about them, but you can look them up. So there were 10 specific miracles that are going to happen on this day. So it's more than 8. It's above and beyond. But 8 is the significant number here. Now, it's on this day that Aaron and Moses are going to be co-priests for a point of time. They both will work together as the ministry is transferred from Moses to Aaron. Remember, Moses lost the ability to be the high priest back at the burning bush. You see, at the burning bush, God asked him to go talk to Pharaoh. Moshe balked at the whole idea. He said, my mouth, I can't speak, I stutter. God continued to talk to him. Now, according to some of the Midrashic writings, they talked for 7 days. And it was on the 8th day that Moses began to walk towards Egypt. He began to go back to where he came from. But he only went because he was told that his brother could speak for him. So he begins the transfer of power. He's still the leader, but he'll no longer be the high priest when it's all said and done. It's a transfer that's going on in that particular point in time. Now, like his younger brother Moses, Aaron's the 7th generation from Abraham. But his children are the 8th generation. And we find the very first story after this is all done is the story of Nadav and Avihu, 2 characters that are going to be this 8th generation, this generation that encircles, that enlightens the entire world, because that's the point of the Torah, to enlighten us. Now, we have the normal light outside and the lamps and all of the other things. But what I wanted to talk about is the fact that they have the ability to enlighten us. Now, I'm not going to get into the story of Nadav and Avihu, because that is a story that'll take a whole lesson all by itself, because there's so many bunny trails of historical significance, dealing with reincarnation, if you would see it. So these characters are going to die. They're going to die a spectacular death, a miraculous death, if nothing else. And they're going to do it after the fire has been lit on the altar, because they're going to take incense in, which is another reason why they say that there is a second set of 8 days. So you can ask me a question about that later. I just wanted to let you know they're going to take fire from the altar, and the altar hasn't been lit yet. They're going to do it early in the morning. They're going to go in and place their fire before God, at which time God is going to take them both out. Now, at that point in time, Aaron and Itatar and his other son, who's going to be the next high priest, Eleazar, are only ones left to complete or continue the duties of the high priest. And so in this story, then, we might want to notice that Aaron is going to pass the baton to Eleazar before they enter into the land. And it's going to be his brother who's actually going to be the first person, shouldn't say the first person, the first priest into the land, because his brother will not have crossed first. So he begins to take his full cycle into the land, and they begin the process of living in the land. Okay, so this is the 8th generation. Now, I can't speak of Aaron and leave Moses out. So it took both of them then to go into the presence of God. Now, Aaron has placed all of the offering on the altar. And I want you to, skipping back to the text, go to verse number 2. I should finish verse 1, shouldn't I? It was on the 8th day, Moses summoned Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. So he's calling them all together. Now, why is he calling them together? The Midrash says that he's calling them together to make sure that the elders understand that the person who will be in charge of the tabernacle from now on will be Aaron and his sons, that I will not have that duty. So they're made aware of this. Now, understand, this is going to cause a problem later, because you remember Korach, that's his problem. He wanted to be the high priest. And so he carries the grudge. But at this point in time, Moses makes it perfectly clear God has ordained that Aaron shall be that character. Now, as you go into verse 2, it begins by saying, he said to Aaron, take yourself a young bull for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. Okay, here we go. The reason for the bull was because of Aaron's fault. Remember, Aaron created the calf. So now he is creating the bull, or he's using the bull as his offering at that point in time. Now, the next animal is a ram. The ram is supposed to represent something else. The last time I talked with you about a ram was on Mount Moriah, when I found a ram in the thicket. That was the ram that needed to be brought to the altar. Why? Because the first ashes on the altar at Moriah were Isaac's ashes with the ram on top. And again, you have to go back to last week in order to even get an understanding of this whole thing. But the concept was that there was one on top of the other. Well, here we now have Aaron's bull and Isaac's ashes. This is because this is a burnt offering. In other words, there's nothing to be eaten. It's totally burnt. So that's what's going on at this particular point in time. I hope I'm not talking too fast, but I keep thinking I'm going to run out of time before I finish. So I talking too fast. But anyway, so one more thing to remember about 7. Seven is to remind us of the natural world. It's to remind us of the imminent light that's around us. The 8, on the other hand, is going to remind us of what surrounds all of that. That's the infinite God. That's what's all around this whole understanding. So in the midst of this, hovering over it, is the reality of God. That's what's there. Nobody sees him because remember in the first 6 days, he built a world in which he hid himself all the way, completely hiding himself. And so it's only every once in a while that these miracles occur, and therefore we get these glimpses of who God is. We see him for a short period. But in the world to come, in the days to come, when the Messiah is here, we will have eyes that will be able to see the workings of God. And it won't be miracles at all. It'll be the natural occurrence of what is going on in the world. That is when we know peace will be here. So I'm jumping ahead. Now I got to go back to where I started from. So right now, the supernal light can't enter in because of the fact that the Messiah has not yet come. We're only beginning to filter in God. This is the 7th. This is now the 8th. This is when God begins to appear. Now, our reading of the chapter and verse really has no meaning in the Torah. It is there only to help us locate the subject under discussion quicker. That's all the verses are going to do for us. I want to first notice that this 8th day is not 8. 8th day is not 8. It is dealing with transcending something, going beyond, leaping over, whatever you want to use for a word at that point. We are really reaching the apex of the story in Vayikra. And so the culmination of the 7 previous days, the culmination of everything that we've seen will now end with the actual altar being lit. And what will actually cause the altar to light? Moses and Aaron together will go into the tabernacle. The altar still has everything on it, but it's not burning. When they come out, that is when the fire will actually bring itself down, descend upon the altar. And Moses and Aaron will walk to the courtyard gate to speak to all of the people. So in other words, everything is reaching this point of transfer of power from one to the other. Now, it doesn't mean Moses is going to die. And I think that was part of the problem that most people had, was they were fearing that Moses would die and Aaron would be left in charge. And Aaron and Moses clearly tell us that together they're partners in this whole process. And so they together will work to get people to the land. That's what's going on. So the 8th day, what was it about? Well, it's attached to preparation, but it's actually the culmination. That's what's actually going on. So we are actually culminating something at this point. Now, 8 holds multiple other meanings. And so I want to try to go back and tie things back up again. We know that it's going to talk about natural versus supernatural. But how does that link with kosher? You see, the second half of this chapter, or this parsha, deals with kosher things. How does this tie to kosher? We have to understand at this particular point, kosher is the idea of that which is natural. Up until this point, we've been dealing with everything in a supernatural way. Anytime God is acting, it's not something that you and I would see. So it is a miracle to us. But in watching kosher, kosher is about things that are natural. It's the world around us. It's what we see and recognize. And in that, we have to recognize that there are certain things in there. Moses was privy to understanding that God told him that the animals that were unkosher were animals that represented nations. He was able to understand that there were going to be groups of people that would come against him. And the greatest group of people would be the pig, because they looked most like them. The pig represented Esau or Edom. When Edom fell, that's when the pig would no longer be unkosher, but would become kosher. But that will never be something that they will eat. It's just that will actually be a change in behavior. Now, in the beginning, Elohim created everything. That was the natural world. But then it says that he Elem. In that he hid himself so that nobody could see him. He was not exposed to anything. So in the end, the only way we can ever get him to be exposed is through mitzvot, things that we do. Every time you and I, during this time, which they call the diaspora, every time we do a mitzvah, we are bringing God closer to revealing himself to the world. When that number of mitzvot is finally finished, and I believe it's the Jews that are going to finish it, when it's finally finished, God will reveal himself through the Messiah, and we'll begin to understand things. The kosher animals will be understood best by Elijah, because Elijah is going to introduce us to the Mashiach, but he's also going to be the great law keeper. He's going to teach us the laws. And so we're going to get a lot of different things. Now, I wanted to add to this by having you turn to Leviticus chapter 11, verse 42. Okay, you ready? Everything that creeps on its belly and everything that walks on four legs, up to those with numerous legs, among all the teetering things that teem upon the earth, you may not eat them, for they are an abomination. Simple enough. Now I want you to go to the right side. If you got your art scroll, I want you to go to the right side on your Bible, and I want you to go down, not quite halfway. You're going to go down to the line. You'll see an asterisk out in front of that line first. It's in the line that's marked Mem Vet. Okay. Just below that line, there's an asterisk. You see it? You see four letters there: Gimel, Het, Vav, and Nun. I want you to look at the vet very closely, or the Vav very closely. You may even need to get your glasses, because that Vav is different than any other Vav in the Torah. If you look at it closely, you'll see that it goes below the line, meaning it's larger than it should be. It's one of those anomalies that are put into the Tanakh. And so the question then becomes, why is that letter larger than all the rest? Well, there are multiple reasons, and I'm going to try to give you some of them, okay, as I understand it. First thing that I want you to understand is, as you're going through that, is that the word gahon that you're seeing there means to bend down. So everything that bends down on its belly, well, they use the word gahon instead of the word that we would normally use, and that's nahash, a serpent. So we're looking at something that bends down and creeps on its belly. Now, before a snake can move, he has to lower himself to the ground to begin to slither. That is a significant understanding. So the gahon is I'm going to cover in a second. Now I want to go back to the letter Vav. The letter Vav is a hook. That's what it means in Hebrew. It was used, remember when Moses was trying to figure out, be accountable for everything that he had, and he couldn't figure out what he did with those other shekels. Well, he made them into Vavs. He made them into hooks to hook the tapestry together. That's what they were used for. So a Vav is a hook. And in this particular case, we're going to clasp two things together. You see, that Vav is the middle letter of the entire Torah. That's the middle letter of the entire Torah. It hooks the left and the right. It hooks the beginning and the end. That's what's going on. So as we're looking at that particular thing, we're looking at something that has hooked these things together. It's talking about a serpent that it has to bend down and start to walk or to creep on its belly. Now, we obviously are talking about an unkosher animal at this particular point in time. We also think when we use the word Nahash, we think all the way back to the Garden of Eden, and we think back to the serpent. Now, we all understand that the serpent did Adam and Eve no favors. But the serpent itself, prior to the fall, this is the hard part to understand, the serpent was holy. The serpent was pure. God made him for a purpose. What do you think the purpose was? The purpose was to give man, to entice man. So I want you to think of the serpent at this particular point, or the Nahash at this particular point. I want you to think of it as the evil inclination. Okay? The evil inclination. Now, the evil inclination, Flip Wilson made the evil inclination very famous. The devil made me do it. Before that whole idea came about, we thought of the first sin as being impulsive, when in reality, when we sin, it's not an immediate action. And by that I mean, evil inclination causes us to procrastinate, to pause. And then maybe that day, maybe 5 minutes later, maybe a week later, the evil inclination then takes root and then comes forward. So in our story then, this serpent that we've been talking about, this large Vav, begins by entering into our minds, because it's already there, and begins to cause us to think, and in essence, really to procrastinate. Because we already know what the right answer is, but if it can get us to stop and think about it, well, you know, there's more to it. And so we begin with this thought of the serpent crawling on its belly. Now, during Pesach, which is at about this time, originally Pesach, if you look at your scriptures, is only 7 days long. 7. But rabbinical law changed it into an 8-day. On the 8th day, they have what is called the celebration, the meal of the Mashiach. The meal of the Mashiach. Now, if I'm looking at Nahash and I'm doing my gematria, Nahash is 358. The value of the word Mashiach is 358. I have some way of linking now my Gahon, my Pesach, my Messiah all together. It's a little slithery, but they're now hooking themselves together as we go through this idea, because they have the same gematria. And again, as you look at Hebrew, you're looking for links, things that tie things together. And that's how you begin to go deeper into the scriptures. Remember, there are 4 levels of scripture. Remember that? I taught you the first one was Parashat, which was the very simple level. The second level was Remez, when we begin to see hints of things. The third one was called Drash. And then when we look at Drash, we're looking at something that is threshing. It is something that goes deeper, which I now want to pause, and I want you to turn backwards in your Bible, and I want you to go back to the 10th chapter of the book of Leviticus, and I want you to go to line number 16, which is a tet and a zayin together, okay? Tet and zayin, okay? Now, if you're on that line, you'll notice in the very middle of the verse, an asterisk. Look at the words before it and after it. They look identical. So why did God put two words together that look identical? Well, actually they're not, because the vowels are different. Now, originally, when it was written, there were no vowels. Vowel punctuation came later. But look at the two words, and what do you see? Well, if you're looking at them, you're going to get the idea that the first one is drosh, which is what we're talking about, threshing, and drash, which talks about instantly. So when we're droshing, we're threshing, we're inquiring. When we drash, it's quick. It's instantaneous. It's insistently. We continually dig through it. Once you find a scripture that you like and you begin to dig through it, it's not hard to find yourself going deeper and deeper and deeper into what the text is saying to you. So that's what's going on here. We're now looking at a text where we're talking about going deeper. Well, what are they going deeper for? Moses, in this particular case, is asked the simple question. He says, Eleazar and Ithamar, why didn't you eat the sin offering? The sin offering isn't a burnt offering, but you allowed it to be burnt. You were supposed to take it off and sit and eat it. Why did you not do that? What's going on? So that's a simple level of looking at this whole idea. Now, there's a lot more. I'm running out of time. I've already gone 40 minutes. I want to keep going. So the concept is the fact that what we're looking at is going to be very, very different. We're going to look deeper into the text, and I want to go back to the Vav again. So the Vav is actually seen three ways. Graphically, we look at it for its meaning, and then we look at it for the number, for the gematria of it. Now, in the first case, the Vav really resembles a hook. When we look at it again, we can actually see that the Vav is a word that speaks of hooks. And then when we look at the Vav again, we can see that the Vav represents the number 6. Letters are numbers and numbers are letters in Hebrew, right? Now, let's look at the Vav again, only this time, I want you to spell the word Vav. Now, when you spell the word Vav, that's called malui. That's stretching it out. So the word Vav is spelled Vav, Aleph, Vav. Okay? Now take those three letters and now let's add those three letters together. What number do you get? 13. 6 plus 1 plus 6 equals 13. 13 leads us to another word. What's the other word that we get led to? Well, it actually leads us to two words. Ahava, which is love, and Ehad, which is oneness. One. Now, let's do some more name game blaming. I want you to take and I want you to add up all the numbers from Aleph to Vav. So that would mean 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6. What's the value that you now have?
21.
21. Now, if you square the number 21, you actually end up with the number 441, which is, what does that do? Well, 441 happens to be the number for emet, truth. As we go through and we begin to sort and select and dig and drosh, go through, we come up with all kinds of understandings. The Torah uses the word gahon because it wants us to emphasize nature. But at the same time, it's not so much the word that's important, it's the idea behind the word. The Zohar discusses the fact that the nature of this snake is that it symbolizes our evil inclination. And that is what causes us to bend down, which is what we've talked about. Now I want to take it a little bit further. Now the Maharasha explains that we have a large Vav here because we have the power to interrupt the snake. We have the power to interrupt the snake, or we have the power to interrupt the evil inclination. That's what he's trying to say. You see, the evil inclination is really incomplete. It requires you to physically act. That's what's necessary. Hopefully, those who are watching the video will have some understanding of the 10 Sephiroth, because I didn't bring a picture to draw for you. But if you don't, grab yourself one, find one on they're everywhere. And you'll find that the Sephiroth are divided on 3 columns. Well, in our story, our evil inclination leans left. In other words, we have Hesed on the right, which is kindness. And kindness speaks of expansion. It speaks of growing. On the left, we have Gevarah. That's the idea of contraction. That's the idea of judgment. That's what's going on. You see, Hesed is too brilliant, too bright. It shines such a light on the evil inclination that we can't act. We need to go towards the constriction. We need to go towards darkness in order for the evil inclination to have work. That's why the evil inclination works so well at night. We don't think anybody can see our faults. Can't see what we do wrong. But in the course of the time, there's this middle column. That's the Vav. That separates those two from one another. And it also keeps, or can keep, our evil inclination from going over to Gevarah. So as we're looking at this, we have the choice. And the choice comes pretty easily. No, it doesn't. So we now have a large Vav. We now talked about the number 13. We've talked about its meaning. Basically, we are talking about the harmony of ourselves as we go through this. Rabbi Schneerson tells us that the Vav hints at a connection between the upper world and the lower world. He notes that when the snake is connected to its upper source, the upper world, it has true holiness and has true purity. Now, remember that there was this copper snake that was out in the wilderness. Remember when the Jews were traveling and they complained so much that they began to suffer from snake bites. But if they looked up, the answer was taken care of. They were healed. Well, so how do we connect our snake in the correct way? First off, we never let our snake bend down. Because when it bends down, you can no longer see up. You can no longer see up. So the evil inclination knows that when we bend down, we make ourselves vulnerable to what's going on. So from now on, remember to keep your head up. The end of the story. So I'm sorry I ran through it, but I took 47 minutes and I wanted to leave time for you to think out loud, if you will. Anything anybody has to offer or question or say it's a nice day, I don't care. Talk to me.